All right, guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about how good is a dagger, like from a number standpoint, right? So we know there's a 5, 10, and 15% health debuff. We're actually going to go over how much damage each troop type takes at end game with equipment and armament. We'll talk about some proc chances, some of the big picture stuff to think about, and we'll wrap up the video from there. All right, so from here, let's go right into it. The picture you see on the left is my equipment, right? So I don't have Awaken 2 for any of my accessories, but all my equipment is Awaken 2 or higher, other than the accessories. There's a few crits, not that many. Don't judge me. As far as the armaments, they're good. Not the best, but good. Probably better than most people's armaments, right? And then once you pull up the report, you can actually start going to troop buff and pulling out the percentages. All right, so this is a German civilization. We're in off season now. We're heading into off season. Max tech still. We're still in Lost Kingdom. So this is pretty close to what you could get for like most players in game, right? Just because once you get to this point, even if you get to Awaken 5 or crit, like it's a few percentage points higher difference with health, but not that much difference. Now I do want to caveat this. I didn't add any of this stuff in the other buffs. None of this stuff really affects health that much, besides maybe this part where you're ignoring enemy health. But in general, when you have a bunch of little things like these that could actually move the number one way or another, it's just think this, what the numbers I'm presenting is a general range, and definitely not even the exact number for my marches, just because there would be way too many things going on. Finally, let's look at this picture here, right? This is just a standard like T5 troop, and there's like a white number on the left and the green number on the right, right? Whenever you put an iconic crystal on equipment, it says +3 plus whatever base attack. That's a number on the white. And then whenever you get, say, like a 10% attack increase, that's actually going to be a multiple of that number. So for example, if your basic attack is 200, and you get a 10% attack increase, you're actually getting 20 points of attack. And that's actually how Lilith calculates it. All right. The green number is always going to be a whole number. And it's actually going to be rounded down, right? So actually, that's how I did the calculation when I did it on the next screen. A few more caveats before I actually get into the numbers. This formula up here, I've been crediting it to Wick Gaming. Someone mentioned that someone else came up with it, which is something that someone mentioned. I actually don't know exactly where it came from. First time I saw it, it was from Wick Gaming. I just assumed he came up with it. So if someone else came up with it, I'm sorry, I just don't know. But this formula, he also even said it himself in the video, that it spit out the number that you would expect up to 10,000 troops. Once you got above 10,000 troops, which, you know, any player is doing, it's going to be a little off because there's some kind of modifier, probably some catch-up mechanism that he couldn't figure out, right? So the way I calculated this was I used 646 attack. That's a final attack number based off of my infantry march for T5. And then the pink numbers are the health numbers, right? So here you can see the baseline. If I had 415 points of health, right, with 10,000 troops with 646 attack, hitting the infantry with a defense and health number, a 200 damage factor, you could expect 44.6, right? And then you can see actually the tankiest out of the three, funny enough, is my archer. Right, by far, it's actually by far the tankiest out of the three, but we tend to relate to archers as like they're very squishy. They're not. It's actually just because for whatever reason they're heavily targeted, and everyone's always going after archers, which is why the numbers might not look so good. But just from a pure like stats standpoint, archers are actually the tankiest because they actually have the best blend, at least for my archers, the best blend of defense and health mixed together to mitigate damage, right? But in general, you can see because infantry has the lowest health relative to the three troop types with the equipment and the armament. The dagger actually has more of an effect, right? It's about a little over 7% when you get to 15% health debuff for archer and cav. It's almost 9% when it's infantry, right? So in general, just think for me, like 7 to 9%, right? For 15%. A little under 4%, so let's just say 4.5% to 6% for 10% health debuff, and then if you're talking about 5% health debuff, it's like 2 to 3%, right? That's kind of fair. It's in line with the numbers here. Okay, now I made the last video talking about rage, that if something can give you an actual like 5% damage increase, I would take that over a horn, right? And I already went over the numbers the last video why. This one I do want to point out, a health debuff, so basically a debuff making an enemy take more damage, is superior to increasing the damage of a march in many ways. One, if I'm making a march take 5% more damage, right, 10 marches could benefit from that if they're all hitting at the same time, right? So this isn't the exact math, just because a Ring of Doom procs for 2 seconds, but there's a 5-second cooldown. But if we imagine a Ring of Doom still has a 10% chance to trigger and it's doing 50% more damage, right? On average, it's the DPS, or damage per second per turn, is actually going to be 5%, right? 10% to proc 50%, it's actually going to be 5%, okay? If you put 10 rings on 10 marches, right, they're each going to average 5% more damage, you know, if with enough turns, okay? If I can actually get 2 procs or 2 stacks of the dagger on a march with 2 accessories, right, versus 10 rings, I can actually achieve the same effect as 10 rings if all 10 marchers are actually hitting the same target, right? So that's why, like, the upside of damage taken debuffs, accessories like this that make the target take more damage, actually scales up a lot higher. So, right, so the boom, or like the upside, is going to be way higher than any other accessory you could come up with. Now, the challenge with the dagger, we're going to go over on the next page with the procs and all that stuff, is that it's conditional, right? You need 2 daggers. You need to set it up where you can actually achieve that, right? Whereas, like, if you just have a, say, like a Greatest Glory on a Smite Commander, you're just going to be doing 5% more damage all the time anyway. So, like, you know, it doesn't matter. You don't have to set it up, right? So one of the determinations is, okay, the upside of the damage dealt, is that worth it relative to how often you can set it up, and then what it costs, what it takes to actually set it up, right? Finally, this is all for T5. Okay, so T4, the combination of defense and health drops down quite a bit, actually. And when that happens, the dagger is actually going to have an even bigger effect, right? So think like these percentages are actually probably for the worst case scenario for the dagger. Whereas, like, once you start getting maybe someone that's doing a mix of T4 and T5, or maybe they're in like the first zone, right, zone 5, and they're running full T4 starting out, the dagger is actually going to be way more effective, okay? Next, let's actually get to proc chances, right? So big thing here is to actually notice the difference between the percentages between 1 and 2 daggers, right? If it's 1 dagger, honestly, it's kind of mid, not because like the stacks aren't good, but because the percentages, or the percent chance of even getting 1, 2, or 3 stacks goes a lot lower. It might not be worth it. Whereas once you get 2 daggers, right, you can even see in the very last one here, in the first 10 seconds, which is actually when this percentage is probably the worst, because once you get this thing going and you even get 1 stack, it's called reaching a steady state. The percentage uptime over 10 seconds is like over 80%, right? But or over 8 seconds out of 10 seconds. Whereas if you're starting from 0, it actually comes out to about 7.5 out of the 10 seconds, where you're going to at least have 1, 2, or 3 stacks on the march. Whereas if you just have 1 dagger, it actually drops to a little over half the time, right? 5.4 out of the 10 seconds, right? So to me, I wanted to show this number, but I wanted to caveat it because it would have been confusing, because I wanted to show the average amount of time it takes to actually get to 2 stacks, okay? If you were going to get to 2 stacks, the average time would have been 2.45 seconds, okay? So it doesn't take that long to get the target you're hitting to like a 5% damage taken debuff, right? The challenge is if you don't actually get there and the stack drops off, then you have to wait 3 seconds and then wait for it to start again, and actually the number goes a lot higher. So if you wanted to do the average, it ends up being over 6 seconds. But like, I think a more relevant way to think about this is actually about 2.5 seconds if you were going to get 2 stacks on the target for it to have 2 stacks. It doesn't take long to ramp up at all. And if you even look at this first chart here, because you can actually technically get 2 stacks in 1 turn, right? There's a 9% chance actually just on the very first turn, the target that you're hitting already has 2 stacks on it, all right? And then finally on this page, before we get even more confusing, I want you guys to actually look at the comparison to a horn, right? So a horn, 30% chance to proc 50 rage. If you just proc it once in 10 turns, it's not going to affect your active skill, right? It's just small enough number. It's a very small chance where it does it. You need to do at least 2 procs for it to actually allow you to fire your active skill 1 second faster, right? The percent for that to happen is going to be 85% for a horn. Now, a Karok's War Drum has a 10% chance to proc, but the biggest downside of the War Drum for me is that there's a 3-second cooldown, right? Because as soon as you proc it, for 3 seconds, the proc chance is going to be 0, right? So like you can actually have a much higher percent chance to proc something, but if the cooldown is there, especially if it's long enough, it actually severely limits the upside of the accessory, the equipment, whatever it is you're using, and it changes the math dramatically. Okay, so a lot of times we just look at the first percentage and we don't think about the actual cooldown and how long it takes. That actually has a huge impact on the math and the actual output of the accessory or the equipment or whatever it is you're using, right? So for the War Drum, right, if there wasn't a 3-second cooldown, in 10 seconds or 10 turns, there would be a 26.39% chance to proc it twice, right? But because there's a 3-second cooldown, that number plummets all the way down to 5%. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm just not really high on the War Drum, besides a couple others, right? Because the War Drum also, it kind of is like the dagger where you need the conditions to be right to set it up. Also, 50 rage is in that range where it's starting to get big enough where if a couple of things proc at once, that proc literally will be completely wasted, right? Because you're just over raging, right? So in general, if they release something, for example, that a horn that procced 80% of the time, but only gave you 18 rage, right? The average rage per turn would actually be lower than 30% to do 50 rage, but I would prefer the 80% to do 18 rage because it's giving a smaller amount of rage. The chances of the rage being wasted is going to be a lot lower. So like from an efficiency and actually like value standpoint, higher percentage of doing rage, but a smaller amount of rage will actually be a lot more effective in the open field. All right. So finally, after all these numbers, the big thing I want you to get from this is that there is this fairly high uptime, especially when you have 2 daggers, if you are connecting with an enemy. And then the determination is just, is that worth it to you to actually get a very, very high upside as far as effect on the field, right? So to kind of make this really simple, in my opinion, the dagger, 2 daggers, is the combination of 2 accessories that has the biggest group effect out of any accessory in the game, right? Like what you can do with 2 daggers as far as like benefiting, not an unlimited amount of marches, but you could even be benefiting up to like 20 marches. Nothing compares to that. No other accessory compares to that, right? Like the Mora's Web does also do a debuff, but it's like less, and its defense is just not good enough. But like you can literally have 2 daggers, right? Have the same effect as like 10 marches with a ring if enough marches are hitting the same target, right? That's what actually to me makes a dagger so good. Now the argument against a dagger is that 1, you need 2, right? Because if you have 1, it's very mid. Like if you have 1 dagger, honestly, either dismantle it or making the next dagger should be probably one of your top priorities as far as equipment, right? Because you literally will go from 1 mediocre accessory to 2, in my opinion, are the best accessories in the game just by crafting that 1 extra dagger, right? The second argument against a dagger is that it's very conditional, right? What if I did bring 2 daggers on the field, but one is on like a very fast cav march and just swung out into the wrong position in a sad face, right? Now I'll have 5 out of my 6 marches on the field, but I only have 1 dagger. For the rest of the time, until I bring the other march out, the dagger has lost a lot of its value, right? Whereas if I just have like a greatest glory, a ring, or even like a horn, right, it doesn't need something else to maintain its value, right? So that's kind of the argument between the two. I personally swing heavily towards the dagger just because I see the upside, and it's just doing way more beyond even what your 5, 6, or 7 marches are doing, right? Like because other people are benefiting from it. But I could also see the case arguing against it. But to say the dagger is just not good, or that the health debuff isn't providing enough of a debuff, is just simply not true, right? I can't emphasize this enough. Debuffing an enemy is way better than increasing your damage. Having an enemy take 10% more damage is way more better than you as a March dealing 10% more damage, just because other people could benefit from the enemy taking more damage. But even from a mathematical standpoint, if you're doing a skill damage increase, right, you go from 30% to 40%, versus you go from a March, wherever they're at for their baseline, to taking 10% more damage, you're going to get way more value with the March taking a lot more damage. All right, so overall, that's my case for the dagger. There's the numbers to kind of like at least back up or justify my thinking. And I do think that if you're going to put a dagger on someone, the best March would be Luchette, right? There are cases where, you're getting cheeseburger, you're not, a shorter duration, you're not all going to connect to the same target. Yes, a dagger wouldn't be as good, but the dagger on Luchette, the percentage of it triggering goes from 30 to 37.5%. All those numbers that I showed over here actually go up quite a bit, and it makes it even more worth it, right? I know if you guys have watched some of the coaching videos I've done, I recommend like Ring and Greatest Glory. That's more of a selfish play because, like, I think Lucha is the best March in the game, whatever you pair him with, and then you really want to maximize the damage output. But if you're talking about like big picture effect, it probably actually would be best suited to be Dagger and then Greatest Glory on Lucha, and not Greatest Glory and Ring. And then finally, I forgot to mention this, the percentage here. If you watched my last video, it's a little bit different. I decided to not include the auxiliary skill. I had an auxiliary skill on here. I think it was like Pyrus or something, where the infantry march already had 10% more health. I originally wanted to kind of present that to even show that even if you give an infantry 10% more health, it would still take enough additional damage with the health debuffs for it to be worth it. But I decided to just take that off, just because that's specific to Orleans. That's not for everyone. All right. And then finally, hopefully this talk about this drum and the 3-second cooldown could kind of maybe like give you a preview of why the butterfly effect could not be that good. All right, Delta formation, in my opinion, has the highest upside out of any formation in the game, but I also think it's more likely than not that the arch formation for cav combo attack will end up being better for the open field than a Delta formation. So we'll kind of talk about that next, the reason why, kind of my plans for transitioning one of my cav armaments into being set up for a combo attack, but why I'm actually starting out with arch and then waiting to see what goes on before I get into Delta, and why I think it's more likely than not that arch formation would be better. All right, so if you watch all the way to the end, you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. Thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you guys next time.